The air freezes as Officer Bradley Wilson's face drains of color, his hand still gripping Marcus Washington's collar. The squad car's lights flash across 5 shocked faces as Marcus calmly holds up his badge. "I'm Chief Washington, Oakland PD. Now remove your hands from my person, officer. Nobody moves, nobody breathes. The consequences of this traffic stop will forever change policing in Riverview County." Before we dive into this shocking story of mistaken identity and racial profiling, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that expose injustice in America. How would you react if you were in Chief Washington's shoes? Let's find out what happened when these officers realized their career-ending mistake. Marcus Washington adjusted his rear-view mirror as he cruised down Highway 24 heading home after a wonderful but exhausting weekend visiting his daughter Alicia at Stanford University. At 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair cropped short and a trim physique maintained despite desk duty, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had dedicated 25 years to law enforcement. As the respected police chief of the Oakland Police Department, he had worked his way up from patrol officer, building a reputation for fairness, integrity, and community-focused policing. Since losing his wife Janet to cancer 5 years ago, he had devoted himself to raising their 2 children alone and to reforming a department that had long struggled with community relations. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road as Marcus entered Riverview County, a predominantly white suburb that served as a buffer between Oakland's urban sprawl and the more affluent communities to the east. He noticed the police cruiser in his rearview mirror about 3 miles back, maintaining the same distance regardless of his speed. Marcus was driving his personal vehicle, a well-maintained but modest 10-year-old sedan, rather than his department-issued SUV. He checked his speedometer, confirming he was traveling exactly at the speed limit of 55 miles per hour. After following him for nearly 15 minutes without cause, the Riverview County patrol car suddenly flashed its lights. Marcus signaled immediately and pulled over to the shoulder, positioning his car properly according to the procedure he had taught hundreds of officers. He turned off the engine, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and lowered his window halfway, following every protocol to the letter. Officers Bradley Wilson and Derek Fowler approached, with hands resting on their holstered weapons, Wilson on the driver's side and Fowler flanking on the passenger side. Wilson was in his early 30s, with close-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to be searching for trouble. His partner Fowler was slightly older, with a receding hairline and a perpetual scowl that had become deeper with years on the force. License and registration. Wilson barked without preamble, his tone unnecessarily aggressive. Marcus maintained his calm demeanor, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Marcus asked politely, his deep voice steady. "License and registration, now." Wilson repeated, his hand moving closer to his weapon. "I'm happy to provide that," Officer Marcus replied, "but I would like to know the reason for the stop." Marcus slowly reached for his wallet, narrating his movements as he had instructed his own officers to do when encountering civilians. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket to retrieve my license." Wilson tensed visibly at the movement. "Just hurry up and don't try anything," he snapped. As Marcus handed over his license and reached for the glove compartment to retrieve his registration, Officer Fowler suddenly shouted, "Watch his hands," creating an unnecessary escalation. Marcus froze, then proceeded with exaggerated slowness. "I'm opening the glove compartment to retrieve my vehicle registration, as requested," he explained calmly. As Marcus handed the documents to Wilson, he asked again, "Could you please tell me why I was pulled over? I don't believe I violated any traffic laws." Wilson glanced at the license without really reading it and replied, "You were exhibiting a suspicious driving pattern." Marcus knew this was false. He had maintained perfect driving etiquette, following all traffic laws. Before he could respond, 2 additional patrol cars suddenly appeared, lights flashing, and parked behind the first. A moment later, a 3rd unit arrived. 5 officers for a routine traffic stop was wildly disproportionate, and Marcus recognized the tactic of intimidation. A small group of pedestrians had stopped on the sidewalk, and Marcus noticed at least 2 people had begun recording the interaction on their phones. Officer Wilson handed the documents to Fowler, without properly examining them, and turned back to Marcus with increasing hostility. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "May I ask why that's necessary?" Marcus inquired, maintaining his professional tone. "Step out of the fucking vehicle!" Now Wilson shouted, his hand now fully on his weapon. Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt and exit the vehicle as requested," he narrated. "My hands will remain visible at all times." As Marcus carefully opened his door and began to step out, all 5 officers moved into aggressive stances too, with hands on their weapons. He stood with perfect posture, hands clearly visible at his sides, as the sun set on what should have been a peaceful drive home, but was rapidly escalating into something far more dangerous. The 5 officers formed a semicircle around Marcus, as he stood beside his car, hands clearly visible at chest height. "Interlace your fingers behind your head," Officer Wilson commanded, his voice carrying across the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus complied immediately, though the position was unnecessarily humiliating for what should have been a routine traffic stop. "Officers, I want to inform you that I am law enforcement," Marcus stated, calmly maintaining eye contact with Wilson. The statement was met with skeptical sneers from the officers. "Yeah, sure you are," Officer Russo, a stocky man with a crew cut who had arrived in one of the backup units, chuckled dismissively. "And I'm the Attorney General." Officer Wilson moved forward, aggressively spinning Marcus around and shoving him hard against the side of his car. The impact knocked the wind from Marcus's lungs, but he maintained his composure, keeping his hands clasped behind his head. "I am Chief Marcus Washington of the Oakland Police Department," he stated again, his voice steady, despite the pressure of Wilson's forearm pressing between his shoulder blades. "Stop resisting, Wilson," shouted, though Marcus was completely compliant. The false accusation was a tactic Marcus recognized immediately, a verbal shield used to justify excessive force while creating a record that would protect officers from accountability. Officer Fowler approached and began an unnecessarily rough pat-down, deliberately jabbing his fingers into pressure points and sensitive areas. "What do we have here?" "Another brother with a nice car he probably can't afford." Fowler muttered loud enough for Marcus to hear, but not for the gathering crowd of witnesses. "Probably got drugs hidden somewhere." Officer Russo leaned in closer, his breath hot on Marcus's neck as he whispered, "You people never learn to stay in your lane, do you?" The racial slur wasn't explicitly stated, but hung in the air between them, unmistakable in its plot. Intent. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, drawing on decades of self-discipline. He thought back to just last month when he had conducted a department-wide training session on proper traffic stop procedures, emphasizing respect, de-escalation, and the elimination of racial bias. He had stood before a room of officers, some reluctant to be there, and spoken passionately about the importance of treating every citizen with dignity, regardless of race or circumstance. Now, less than 30 miles from his jurisdiction, he was experiencing firsthand the very behavior he had worked so hard to eradicate. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but this level of force is unnecessary," Marcus stated, his voice remaining professional despite the humiliation. "I am fully compliant and pose no threat." "Shut up, nobody asked you to speak," Wilson barked, pressing Marcus harder against the vehicle. The rough handling caused Marcus's phone to slip from his jacket pocket, clattering to the ground. The screen lit up with an incoming call displaying Mayor Williams prominently. Fowler scooped up the phone, eyebrows raising as he showed it to Wilson. "Look at this. This joker has someone in his contacts named Mayor Williams. These guys will make up anything." They both laughed derisively. "Yeah, I'm sure the mayor calls you all the time," Wilson mocked, shoving the phone into his own pocket rather than returning it. The officers continued their search, pulling Marcus's wallet from his back pocket and rifling through it, carelessly dropping several cards onto the ground. "You should know that there will be consequences for this treatment," Marcus warned, maintaining his dignity despite the degrading situation. "I suggest you check my identification more carefully." This only prompted more laughter from the officers. "Oh, we've got a tough guy here," Russo called out to his colleagues. "Another black man claiming connections. Next he'll tell us he knows the governor." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with several people openly recording the incident on their phones. Marcus could hear murmurs of concern and outrage from some witnesses. Officer Wilson pulled a handcuff from his belt. "You know what, I don't like your attitude. Let's continue this conversation down at the station." As Wilson roughly grabbed Marcus's wrist to apply the handcuff, something fell from the folds of Marcus's wallet that had been carelessly searched. It landed face up on the asphalt, gleaming in the last rays of sunlight, and the flashing police lights a gold shield with the unmistakable words, "Chief of Police," clearly visible along with Marcus's official police identification. Card showing his photo in full-dress uniform. Officer Wilson froze mid-motion, the handcuff dangling from his fingers as his eyes fixed on the golden shield lying on the ground. The color drained from his face as he slowly bent to pick up the police chief's badge, turning it over in his hands, as if hoping it might transform into something less damning. "Oh shit," he whispered, barely audible. Behind him, Officer Fowler stepped forward, peering over Wilson's shoulder. His eyes widened, jaw slackening, as recognition dawned. That's a chief's badge," he stammered, his voice cracking. Officer Russo pushed forward, his previous swagger evaporating instantly. "Let me see that," he demanded, snatching the badge from Wilson's trembling hands. His face cycled through emotions, disbelief, recognition, and finally undisguised fear. The two remaining officers, who had been hanging back near their patrol cars, approached cautiously, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. One of them, younger than the others, and clearly a rookie, looked physically ill as he realized the gravity of the situation. Marcus remained perfectly still, his hands still behind his head in the position he had been ordered to maintain. His expression remained neutral, revealing nothing of the thoughts racing through his mind. He observed each officer's reaction with the practiced eye of someone who had conducted countless internal affairs investigations throughout his career. In the sudden silence, the sounds of traffic and the murmurs from the growing crowd seemed unnaturally loud. Officer Wilson was the first to regain his composure, though his voice lacked its previous authority. "Sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding," he began, already crafting excuses. "We had reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in—" "Putting the step back from him right now," a new voice commanded. Sergeant Thomas Hayes, a 20-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face, pushed through the circle of officers. Unlike the others, Hayes immediately recognized Marcus. "Chief Washington," he said, his face ashen. I don't know what to say, sir." The effect of Hayes' words on the other officers was immediate and dramatic. They all took several steps back, hands moving away from their weapons postures, shifting from aggressive to deferential in seconds. "My God, it's really him," Fowler muttered, looking as though he might faint. "Chief Washington," Sir Wilson began, his voice now obsequious, "this is a terrible mistake. If you'd just identified yourself earlier—" "I did," Marcus replied, finally lowering his hands and turning to face the officers directly. His dignity was palpable, his authority undeniable, despite the humiliation he had just endured. 3 times. The assembled officers began talking over each other, a chorus of panicked apologies and explanations. "Sir, we had no idea. There was a bulletin about a similar vehicle. If you'd just shown your badge immediately—" Marcus held up his hand, and the excuses died instantly. In the sudden silence, he straightened his jacket with deliberate movements. The crowd had grown substantially many, with phones recording every moment of the unfolding drama. The video would be viral within hours, Marcus knew. He could already see the headlines. Marcus's phone, still in Wilson's pocket, rang again. "I believe that's mine," Marcus said quietly. Wilson fumbled to return it, nearly dropping it in his haste. The screen still showed Mayor Williams. Marcus answered calmly, "James, I'll have to call you back. I'm in the middle of something." He ended the call without elaboration, tucking the phone into his jacket pocket. The implications of that simple exchange, that he was indeed on a first-name basis with the mayor, were not lost on the officers. As Marcus stood facing the group of now subdued officers, he recalled a similar incident, 15 years earlier, before he had risen to his current position. He had been a lieutenant then, driving through an affluent neighborhood to attend a community meeting, when he was pulled over, dragged from his car, and handcuffed before his fellow officers arrived to vouch for him. He had sworn then that he would work to change the system from within, to ensure no one faced such treatment, regardless of their rank or position. Now, standing on this roadside in Riverview County, he realized how little had changed. "I will require each of your badge numbers and names," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "Sergeant Hayes, ensure that all body camera footage is preserved. Nothing is to be deleted or altered." Hayes nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." The officers exchanged terrified glances. Wilson stepped forward, desperation evident in every line of his body. "Chief Washington, sir, perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an understanding that doesn't require formal reports." Marcus regarded him silently for a long moment. "Officer Wilson, are you suggesting that I participate in covering up police misconduct?" Wilson blanched, stumbling over his words. "No, sir, I just meant. Because that would be a violation of my oath of office." Marcus continued, as well as multiple department regulations and possibly state law. Without waiting for a response, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "This is Chief Washington. I need an internal affairs team at my location immediately." He provided the cross streets and ended the call, turning back to the assembled officers who now looked as though they were facing a firing squad. "Until IA arrives, not one of you is to leave this scene or speak to each other. Is that understood?" A chorus of subdued "yes, sir" responses followed. Could you imagine being in Chief Washington's shoes right now? The humiliation turning to vindication as these officers realize their horrifying mistake. If you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling, comment number 1 below. If you believe there should be more accountability for officers who abuse their power, comment number 2. And if you're wondering what consequences these officers will face for their actions, hit that like button and subscribe to find out in the next part of this incredible true story. How will Internal Affairs respond to this incident? Will these officers face real consequences, or will the thin blue line protect them once again? Stay tuned to find out what happens when the full weight of a police chief's authority comes crashing down on those who discriminated against him. The Internal Affairs investigators arrived in unmarked vehicles within 20 minutes, their expressions grim as they surveyed the scene. The crowd of onlookers had doubled in size, with local news vans, now parked along the roadside, reporters, speaking urgently into cameras against the backdrop of flashing police lights. Lieutenant Sofia Rodriguez, head of Oakland PD's Internal Affairs Division, approached Marcus with professional concern. "Chief Washington, are you all right?" she asked quietly, her eyes scanning him for any signs of injury. Marcus nodded once. "I'm fine, Lieutenant. Let's proceed by the book. I want statements from all officers involved, body camera footage secured, and witness statements collected from everyone willing to provide them." Rodriguez nodded and immediately began directing her team of 4 investigators who spread out to separate the Riverview officers and begin preliminary interviews. Marcus provided his own detailed statement, recounting every moment of the stop with the precision of someone who had taken thousands of witness statements throughout his career. He described the unnecessary escalation, the racial undertones, and the dismissal of his repeated identification as a fellow officer. As he spoke, an IA technician connected to each officer's body camera, downloading the footage directly to secure unalterable storage. The footage from Officer Wilson's camera was reviewed on site, confirming everything Marcus had stated. Rodriguez's face darkened as she watched the video, particularly at the moments when racial slurs were muttered just loudly enough for Marcus to hear, but not loud enough to be picked up clearly by the cameras. "We'll enhance the audio," she promised. Investigators moved through the crowd, collecting statements from witnesses who had recorded portions of the incident on their phones. Many eagerly shared their videos, expressing outrage at the treatment they had witnessed. "I couldn't believe how they were treating him," one elderly white woman told an investigator. "Even before they knew who he was, there was no cause for that kind of behavior. I've lived in Riverview for 40 years, and I've seen this happen too many times." Local media had gotten wind of the high-profile nature of the incident, and reporters were now broadcasting live from the scene. "We're standing at the location where Oakland Police Chief Marcus Washington was reportedly subjected to racial profiling and excessive force by Riverview County officers," one reporter announced into her microphone, the red light of the camera emphasizing the gravity of her words. Sources tell us that Chief Washington was physically assaulted during what should have been a routine traffic stop, with officers allegedly ignoring his identification as a law enforcement official. Marcus was giving instructions to Rodriguez when a silver SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of the police perimeter. Alicia Washington, Marcus's 20-year-old daughter, jumped out and ran toward her father, her face a mask of fear and concern. She had seen footage of the incident already circulating on social media, posted by witnesses, before the news crews even arrived. "Dad," she called out, ducking under the yellow tape, despite an officer's attempt to stop her. Marcus turned, his professional demeanor softening slightly at the sight of his daughter. He met her halfway, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I'm okay, Alicia," he assured her quietly. "I'm not hurt." Alicia's eyes brimmed with tears of relief and anger. "I saw the videos online. They were already treating you like that, and they didn't even know who you were. If you weren't the chief—" She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Both of them knew what often happened to black men who encountered police officers like Wilson and his colleagues. Before Marcus could respond further, another vehicle arrived, the mayoral limousine. Mayor James Williams, a tall man with distinguished gray temples and an air of authority that matched Marcus's own, strode purposefully toward them. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand, "I came as soon as I heard. This is completely unacceptable." The mayor turned to face the assembled media, positioning himself beside Marcus in a clear show of support. "What happened here today is a disgrace," he announced, his voice carrying to the microphones thrust forward by eager reporters. "Chief Washington is one of the finest law enforcement officers in this state, and the treatment he received will be thoroughly investigated. I am personally guaranteeing that appropriate action will be taken." Behind them, the Riverview County officers were being placed on immediate administrative leave, their weapons and badges collected by their own supervisor, Sergeant Hayes, who looked physically ill at the developing situation. Hayes approached Marcus cautiously after securing his officer's equipment. "Chief Washington," he began, his voice low. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Marcus nodded and stepped away from the mayor and his daughter. Hayes's face was lined with shame and regret. "I want you to know that I've been concerned about Wilson and some of the others for a while now," he admitted. "There have been incidents, complaints. And yet they're still on patrol," Marcus observed neutrally. Hayes winced. "It's complicated. Wilson's father was a captain here for 30 years. He still has influence. Anyone who speaks against his son finds themselves isolated or transferred to undesirable assignments," Marcus finished for him. Hayes nodded miserably. "I should have done more," he admitted. "It shouldn't have taken something like this." Marcus studied the sergeant thoughtfully. "Perhaps now you will," he suggested quietly before returning to the investigation. It was nearly midnight when Marcus finally arrived home, the events of the day weighing on him physically and emotionally. He sat heavily on his couch in the darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. The adrenaline that had sustained him throughout the confrontation and its aftermath had long since dissipated, leaving him drained. He thought back to his academy days when an instructor had warned the class that black officers would face a unique burden, being viewed with suspicion by some members of their own community for wearing the badge while simultaneously facing racism from within the force. Marcus had experienced both throughout his career, but had believed that his rise to chief would finally allow him to effect real change. Now, staring into the darkness of his living room, he confronted the reality that his position had perhaps insulated him from the everyday experiences of ordinary black citizens, giving him the illusion that things had improved more than they actually had. His phone rang, displaying Commissioner Reynolds on the screen. David Reynolds was the police commissioner for the entire county, overseeing all departments, including Oakland and Riverview. Washington. Marcus answered his voice, betraying none of his fatigue. "Marcus, I just heard." "This is a complete disaster," Reynolds said without preamble. "I'm calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. We need to get ahead of this before it explodes further." "It's already exploding," David Marcus replied calmly. "The videos are all over social media, which is exactly why we need to manage this carefully," Reynolds emphasized. "There are political considerations, relationships between departments, union issues." Marcus cut him off. The only consideration should be accountability for officers who abuse their authority and engage in racial profiling. There was a weighted pause before Reynolds responded. "Just be at the meeting, Marcus. We'll discuss everything then." After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence for several more minutes. Finally, he made his decision. This incident would not be swept under the rug like so many others. He would use it as a catalyst for the systemic change he had been working toward his entire career, regardless of the personal and professional cost. Tomorrow would be just the beginning. The Oakland Police Department headquarters buzzed with unusual activity for 7:30 in the morning. Officers and administrative staff whispered in corners, conversations abruptly halting when others approached. Everyone had seen the videos by now. They had spread across social media platforms overnight, accumulating millions of views and thousands of outraged comments. National news networks had picked up the story, and satellite trucks were already parked outside the building. Marcus arrived at 7:45, walking through the lobby with his usual measured stride, despite having slept barely 3 hours. Conversations died as he passed, replaced by murmurs of support or awkward silence. He nodded acknowledgments, but didn't stop until he reached the conference room where Commissioner David Reynolds was already waiting, along with the city attorney, the head of the police union, and several other high-ranking officials. Reynolds, a political appointee who had never served as an officer, adjusted his tie nervously as Marcus entered. "Marcus, good, you're here. We need to get our messaging straight before this gets any further out of hand." Marcus took his seat, silently observing the discomfort around the table. The city attorney, Elena Vasquez, spoke first. "Chief Washington, I want to express my personal apologies for what happened to you. It was inexcusable." Reynolds nodded rapidly. "Absolutely inexcusable, and we'll make sure there's an appropriate response." However, he leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "We need to consider the broader implications. Relations between departments, public perception of law enforcement as a whole, potential civil unrest if this continues to inflame community tensions." Marcus studied the commissioner's face. "What exactly are you suggesting?" David Reynolds exchanged glances with Henry Dawson, the police union representative. "A measured response." Administrative leave for the officers directly involved a joint statement about improving interdepartmental communication, perhaps some additional training requirements. "We show we're taking it seriously without creating a circus." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And what about the pattern of behavior these officers have exhibited?" This wasn't an isolated incident. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Marcus continued. "I've spent the early hours of this morning reviewing complaint records against these officers. Officer Wilson has had 7 civilian complaints for excessive force in the past 3 years, all dismissed without investigation. Officer Fowler has 5 similar complaints. Officer Russo has 3+2 for using racial slurs during arrests." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Those are unsubstantiated allegations. They're consistent with their behavior toward me," Marcus pointed out. Behavior that was captured on body cameras and civilian recordings. He turned to face Dawson directly. "And I'm curious why the union has aggressively defended these officers after each complaint, despite clear evidence of misconduct." Dawson bristled. "The union defends all its members. That's our job. Even when they dishonor the badge and endanger public trust," Marcus challenged. "The thin blue line shouldn't protect officers who abuse their authority." The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus opened his laptop and turned it to face the group. "This is what I found examining traffic stop data from Riverview County for the past 5 years. Black drivers are 7 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers. They're 12 times more likely to have their vehicles searched, despite contraband being found more frequently in vehicles driven by white individuals. They're 9 times more likely to have force used against them during these stops." The data was irrefutable, displayed in stark charts and graphs that told a story of systematic racial profiling. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Marcus, these statistics could be interpreted in various ways." "Could they?" Marcus asked quietly. "And how would you interpret the fact that Officer Wilson's father, retired Captain Richard Wilson, has personally intervened in 3 internal investigations of his son, or that complaints against these officers routinely disappear from the system. The city attorney paled. "Chief Washington, are you alleging evidence tampering? I'm stating facts," Marcus replied calmly. "Facts that would emerge in any thorough investigation or potential litigation." Reynolds's demeanor shifted suddenly, his conciliatory tone hardening. "Marcus, you need to consider your position here. This could damage your career, if not handled delicately. There are powerful people who won't appreciate having their departments dragged through the mud." "Is that a threat, Commissioner?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Reynolds backpedaled quickly. "A caution from a friend. You've worked hard to get where you are. Think about your future." Marcus closed his laptop deliberately. "I am thinking about the future of policing in this county, the future of community relations, the future where a black man can drive home without fear of being dragged from his car and assaulted by the very people sworn to protect and serve." Before Reynolds could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Police Chief Monica Garcia from the neighboring Westridge district. "Saw the videos. Full support for whatever you need. Just say the word." Similar messages had been arriving all morning from other police chiefs across the state, offering solidarity and assistance. Marcus knew he wasn't alone in this fight. Reynolds must have sensed the shift in dynamics. "Look, no one's saying there shouldn't be consequences, but a public spectacle helps no one. Let's handle this internally with dignity." "Like the dignity I was shown yesterday?" Marcus asked pointedly. Before anyone could respond, Marcus's phone rang. It was his son Michael, a cadet at the police academy. "Excuse me," Marcus said, stepping out of the conference room to take the call. Dad Michael's voice was tense. "The instructors are treating me differently today. Some of the cadets, too. I overheard one instructor saying I should drop out before I cause problems like you." Marcus closed his eyes, briefly absorbing this new blow. His fight wasn't just affecting him, but his family as well. "Stand your ground, Michael. You belong there as much as anyone. We'll talk more tonight." When Marcus returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed. The participants were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones that ceased abruptly upon his entrance. Reynolds straightened, adjusting his tie again. "Marcus, while you were out, we've agreed that a joint statement might be the best approach. We acknowledge the incident, express regret, announce a review of procedures, and everyone moves forward professionally." Marcus regarded them all silently for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "That's not going to happen." Reynolds blinked in surprise. "Excuse me, there will be a full investigation. There will be appropriate disciplinary action. And there will be structural changes to prevent this from happening again. Not just in Riverview, but countywide." The union representative scoffed. "You don't have the authority to dictate terms to other departments." Perhaps not, Marcus acknowledged. "But I do have the authority to invite the Department of Justice to investigate patterns and practices of civil rights violations. I have the authority to speak to the media about my experience and the data I've collected. And I have the moral obligation to ensure that what happened to me doesn't continue happening to others who don't have a chief's badge to protect them." The threat of federal involvement hung in the air like a thundercloud. Reynolds' face flushed with anger. "Think very carefully about your next steps, Marcus. There are consequences to making enemies." Marcus stood gathering his materials. "I'm well aware of the consequences, Commissioner. I've lived with them my entire career. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences of standing in the way of necessary change." As he walked out of the conference room, Marcus knew he had just placed his career on the line. But some things were more important than career advancement or political alliances. His phone buzzed again with a new notification, an anonymous text message from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Know your place." The threats had begun right on schedule. But Marcus Washington had never been one to back down from a fight, especially one where the stakes were this high. He had evidence of systematic protection of racist officers, cover-ups extending to the highest levels of county law enforcement, and now he had his own personal experience to add to the record. Whatever came next, he was prepared to face it head-on. The video of Chief Marcus Washington's encounter with the Riverview police officers exploded across social media platforms by morning. Hashtags like #Chief Washington, #Stop Resisting, and #Police Accountability trended nationally. News outlets played the footage on continuous loops, commentators from across the political spectrum weighing in on its significance. By afternoon, spontaneous protests had formed outside the Riverview County Police Department, hundreds of people carrying signs reading, "Even a police chief isn't safe, while black and who polices." The police Marcus watched the coverage from his office, his expression grave. He had given a brief statement to the press that morning, focusing on the need for accountability and systemic change rather than his personal experience. He had been careful not to inflame tensions further, but the incident had clearly touched a nerve, becoming a flashpoint in the ongoing national conversation about race and policing. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from civil rights leaders, politicians, and media outlets requesting interviews or offering support. The governor had called personally to express concern, and several state legislators were already discussing potential reforms to police oversight mechanisms. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Rodriguez entered, her expression troubled. "Chief, we've received credible threats against you and your family. I've assigned officers to protective detail, but I'm concerned about your children." Marcus nodded grimly. "I've already sent Alicia and Michael to stay with my sister in Sacramento." "What about the investigation?" Rodriguez placed a folder on his desk. "It's not good. We've found evidence that complaints against these officers have been systematically buried. The internal review system in Riverview is fundamentally compromised. And there's more." She hesitated. "Wilson's father, the retired captain, seems to have connections to the commissioner's office. Several complaints were quashed directly from above." Marcus wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still sent a chill through him. The corruption ran deeper than he had initially suspected. Chief Rodriguez continued hesitantly, the union's closing ranks. "They're preparing to fight back hard." Before Marcus could respond, his assistant knocked urgently. "Sir, you need to see this." She turned up the volume on the office television, where Officer Bradley Wilson was giving a live interview, his wife and young children flanking him, the picture of a dedicated family man under siege. "I want to express my deepest regrets to Chief Washington," Wilson was saying, his voice cracking with what appeared to be emotion. "It was a misunderstanding in the line of duty. We had received reports of a similar vehicle involved in suspicious activity, and I was simply following protocol to ensure public safety." The interviewer, a sympathetic blonde woman, nodded understandingly. "So you're saying this wasn't about race at all?" Wilson shook his head emphatically. "Absolutely not. I have black colleagues who are like family to me. This was a procedural mistake, nothing more. Now my family is receiving death threats, and my children can't go to school." The camera panned to his young daughter, who looked tearfully into the lens. Marcus switched off the television, disgust evident in his expression. "They're trying to flip the narrative," Rodriguez observed. "Make Wilson the victim instead of the perpetrator." "It won't work," Marcus replied, though he knew such tactics often did work, muddying the waters enough to prevent clear accountability. "We have the evidence." His phone rang again, this time displaying the number for a local community center. Reverend James Turner, a longtime community leader and occasional critic of the police department, was requesting an urgent meeting. Marcus agreed immediately. That evening, Marcus found himself in the basement of Greater Hope Baptist Church, facing a room divided. On one side sat community activists, family members of individuals who had reported police misconduct, and younger community members with open distrust written across their faces. On the other side, a smaller group of local business owners and older residents concerned about public safety and the potential for unrest. Reverend Turner, a tall man with a commanding presence, despite his 70 years, called the meeting to order. "We have Chief Washington here tonight to address what happened yesterday and where we go from here. I think we all agree that what occurred was unacceptable, but we need constructive dialogue about solutions." A young woman stood immediately, her expression fierce. "With all due respect, Reverend, we're past dialogue. We've been talking for years, while nothing changes. It took the police chief himself being brutalized for anyone to pay attention." Murmurs of agreement rippled through one side of the room. My brother was beaten worse than that. During a traffic stop last year, she continued, and his complaint was dismissed without investigation. Where was the outrage then? Marcus stood to address her directly. "You're absolutely right," he said, surprising many in the room. "What happened to me is getting attention because of my position, but it's the same experience many in our community face daily. The difference is, I now have the platform and the evidence to force change, and I intend to use it." An older man from the business community stood. "Chief Washington, while what happened to you was inexcusable, these protests are bad for business and community safety. We need order restored." Marcus turned to him calmly. "Mr. Davis, I understand your concern. But order without justice is merely suppression. What we need isn't the absence of tension but the presence of fairness." As the meeting continued, Marcus faced hostile questions from both sides, some suggesting he was using the incident to advance his career, others accusing him of being part of the system for too long to effect real change. He answered each with candor and conviction, neither defensive nor combative. By the end of the 3-hour session, he had outlined a comprehensive plan for reform that included independent civilian oversight, transparent complaint procedures, mandatory body cameras with public access to footage and psychological screening for racial bias. Not everyone was satisfied, but there was cautious support for concrete action rather than mere promises. As Marcus left the church, a reporter thrust a microphone toward him. "Chief, how do you respond to claims that you orchestrated this incident to advance a political agenda against the police?" The absurdity of the question momentarily stunned him. "I did not orchestrate being dragged from my car, physically assaulted and humiliated on the side of the road," he replied evenly. "But I will use this experience to fight for those who endure similar treatment without the protection of rank or public attention." The next morning brought a new wave of media coverage, much of it focusing on Marcus's calm and measured response to provocative questioning. Public opinion was solidifying behind him, though a counter-narrative was emerging in certain circles, questioning his motives and even his record as chief. Marcus paid it little attention as he prepared for a crucial meeting with community leaders and police reform advocates. His phone buzzed with a notification from his home security system. Opening the app, his stomach tightened at the images. Crude racial slurs spray-painted across his garage door, his mailbox smashed and windows broken. The message was clear: there would be a price to pay for challenging the status quo. "Do you believe Chief Washington should continue his fight for police reform, despite the personal risks, or should he focus on protecting himself and his family?" Comment number 1, if you think justice is worth any price. Or number 2, if you police reform any price, believe he should prioritize his safety. Do you think incidents like this can lead to real change, or will the system protect itself as it always has? Like and subscribe to see how this story unfolds as Chief Washington faces increasing backlash while fighting for accountability. What would you do if you were in his position, facing threats to your career, reputation, and family? How far would you go to ensure justice is served when the very system designed to uphold it seems determined to protect its own? Stay with us as we discover whether one man, even a police chief, can stand against entrenched power and win. The department hearing for the officers involved was scheduled for the following Monday, giving Marcus less than a week to prepare his testimony. He worked closely with Lieutenant Rodriguez and the Internal Affairs team, gathering evidence not only about the incident itself, but the pattern of behavior that had preceded it. The task was complicated by unexpected obstacles that seemed to appear at every turn. Case files that should have been easily accessible were suddenly misplaced. Witnesses who had initially been eager to share their experiences with the officers in question were now reluctant to come forward, some admitting they had received intimidating phone calls, warning them to stay silent. Most concerning was the legal team assembled to defend the officers, led by former District Attorney William Hargrove, known for his aggressive tactics and close relationships with law enforcement. Hargrove had served as DA for 15 years, before moving to private practice, where he specialized in defending police officers accused of misconduct. His involvement signaled that powerful forces were aligning against Marcus. "They're bringing out the big guns," Rodriguez observed, as they reviewed the witness list for the hearing. "Hargrove doesn't come cheap. Someone's bankrolling this defense." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Follow the money. Find out who's paying his fees." Rodriguez left to pursue this lead, while Marcus continued examining traffic stop data complaint records and the officers' personnel files, which he had finally obtained through his authority as chief. The pattern was unmistakable. Wilson, Fowler, and Russo had consistently targeted minority drivers, escalated routine stops into confrontational encounters, and used force disproportionately against Black and Latino citizens. More disturbing was what Marcus discovered: next internal investigations that had begun against these officers mysteriously ended without conclusions. Witnesses changed statements, and in 3 cases complainants suddenly withdrew their allegations after reporting harassment. This wasn't just about individual officers, it was about a system designed to protect them from accountability. Marcus was deep in these records when his phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but he answered anyway. "Washington. Chief, this is Officer Derek Fowler." The voice was hesitant, nervous. I think we should talk." Marcus was immediately on guard. "About what, Officer Fowler?" "Not over the phone," Fowler insisted. "Can we meet somewhere private? There are things you should know about the department culture in Riverview, about Captain Wilson and others." Marcus considered the request carefully. It could be a setup, an attempt to entrap him in some way, or to gather information about his strategy. But it could also be legitimate, a potential crack in the wall of silence. "The Oakland Botanical Gardens near the Eastern Pavilion, 1 hour. Come alone, and I'll do the same." Marcus arrived early, positioning himself with clear sightlines in all directions. He had informed Rodriguez of the meeting as a precaution, but had agreed to meet Fowler alone as requested. Fowler arrived 10 minutes late, constantly glancing over his shoulder as he approached. "Thank you for coming," he began awkwardly. "I know you have no reason to trust me after what happened." "I'm listening," Marcus replied neutrally. Fowler took a deep breath. "What happened to you wasn't random. You were targeted." Marcus's expression remained unchanged. "Explain." "Your car was flagged in our system days before the stop. Someone high up wanted you pulled over, wanted to. I don't know, intimidate you maybe. Teach you a lesson," Wilson was told to make it happen. "Who gave the order?" Marcus asked. Fowler shook his head. "I don't know for sure. It came through Captain Stevens, but he was just passing it down. Word is it came from the commissioner's office." Marcus processed this information silently. If true, it meant Commissioner Reynolds had been involved from the beginning, perhaps in response to Marcus's efforts to implement reforms that would affect all departments in the county. "There's more," Fowler continued. "The racial profiling, the excessive force, it's not just a few bad officers. It's policy, unofficial, but real. Certain neighborhoods, certain types of drivers, they're targeted deliberately. The quotas, the performance evaluations, everything pushes us toward these stops." "And you participated in this system," Marcus observed. Fowler looked down. "Yes, I did. I'm not proud of it. But speaking against it." He trailed off, the implication clear. Officers who objected didn't last long. "Why come forward now?" Marcus asked. "Because what happened to you crossed a line," Fowler replied. "And because I've got 2 kids who deserve a father they can respect." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "I'll need you to make an official statement. Your testimony could be crucial." Fowler paled. "They'll destroy me. My career may be worse. I can offer some protection, but yes, there will be consequences," Marcus acknowledged. "The question is whether you can live with the consequences of staying silent." Fowler nodded slowly. "I'll testify. But not just about what happened that day. About everything." As they parted ways, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and concern. Fowler's testimony could break the case wide open, but it also made him a target. Marcus would need to move quickly to secure the officer's statement before pressure or fear could change his mind. The next morning brought a new complication. Lieutenant Rodriguez burst into Marcus's office, her expression grim. The body camera footage is gone. All of it. Deleted from the secure server. Marcus sat back processing this development. Backup's gone too. Someone with high-level access wiped everything. We still have the civilian recordings, but they don't capture everything the body cams did. It was a significant blow, but not an unexpected one. They're getting desperate, Marcus observed, which means we're on the right track. What about Fowler's statement taken and secured multiple copies in different locations, Rodriguez confirmed. But there's something else. Officer Wilson's father was seen entering the evidence room yesterday evening. No record of what he accessed. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Keep digging, and double security on all remaining evidence. The day of the hearing arrived with tension hanging over the department like a storm cloud. The hearing room was packed with representatives from various police agencies, community organizations, and the media crowding the available space. Marcus sat alone at one table, having chosen to represent himself rather than involve the department's legal team whom he wasn't certain he could trust. Across from him, the accused officers sat with Hargrove and two associate attorneys, a formidable legal team for what was supposedly an administrative proceeding. The five-member panel consisted of two representatives from Internal Affairs, one from the police union, one civilian oversight member, and a senior captain from a neighboring department serving as chair. Captain Richard Wilson, Officer Wilson's father, sat directly behind his son, his presence, a clear message of familial and departmental support. Marcus presented his case methodically, beginning with the traffic stop itself, continuing through the escalation and use of force, and concluding with the pattern of similar behavior established by the officer's records. Despite Hargrove's frequent objections and attempts to discredit the evidence, Marcus maintained his composure, presenting facts rather than emotions. When Officer Fowler was called to testify, a murmur ran through the room. Hargrove looked genuinely surprised, having expected Fowler to maintain solidarity with his fellow officers. Fowler's testimony was devastating, confirming the targeting of Marcus's vehicle, the departmental culture of racial profiling, and the systematic burial of complaints. Throughout his testimony, Fowler avoided looking at his former colleagues or Captain Wilson, whose face had darkened with fury. When Hargrove rose for cross-examination, his approach was brutal. Officer Fowler, isn't it true that you're currently facing a divorce and child custody battle? He began attempting to portray Fowler as unstable and unreliable. Isn't it true that you've been passed over for promotion 3 times, giving you ample motive to fabricate allegations against the department? Fowler withstood the onslaught steadily, neither defensive nor combative in his responses. When Captain Wilson took the stand as a character witness for his son, he painted a picture of a dedicated officer from a law enforcement family serving his community despite increasing hostility toward police. "My son has an exemplary record," Wilson Sr. insisted. "This entire proceeding is politically motivated by Chief Washington's agenda to undermine traditional policing methods that keep our communities safe." Marcus's cross-examination was brief but pointed. "Captain Wilson, in your 30 years with Riverview PD, how many times did you personally intervene in investigations involving your son?" The captain's face flushed. "I never intervened improperly in any investigation." "So you deny, speaking to Internal Affairs Lieutenant James Cooper on April 7th of last year regarding a complaint against your son, or meeting with Commissioner Reynolds on September 12th regarding another complaint?" Wilson Sr. glanced at his son, then at Hargrove, who looked equally concerned about this line of questioning. "I may have had conversations about department matters, but I never interfered with any investigation." The testimony continued for hours with multiple witnesses from both sides. Just as the hearing seemed to be winding down, the doors at the back of the room opened, and a young woman entered, approaching Marcus with a USB drive. She whispered something in his ear, and for the first time that day Marcus smiled. "Chairperson, I request permission to introduce new evidence that has just become available," Marcus announced. "What evidence?" Hargrove demanded, rising to his feet. "An additional video recording of the incident in question, captured from an angle not previously available to us." Despite Hargrove's strenuous objections, the panel voted to allow the new evidence, The room fell silent as the video played on the large monitor. Unlike the somewhat distant civilian recordings, this footage was clear, captured from a nearby business's security camera that had perfect sight lines to the entire incident. Every word, every action was clearly visible, including the racial slurs that had been barely audible on other recordings. Most damning was a clear image of Officer Wilson planting evidence in Marcus's car, while other officers blocked the view from bystanders, a moment that had not been captured in any previous footage. As the video ended, the room remained silent for several long seconds. Hargrove huddled with his clients, their expressions grave. The panel members exchanged glances, their decisions seemingly made easier by this new evidence. Marcus sat quietly waiting. The panel's deliberation was surprisingly brief. They returned after just 30 minutes, their expressions solemn. Based on the evidence presented, the chairperson began. This panel finds that Officers Wilson, Fowler, and Russo violated multiple departmental policies, used excessive force without justification, engaged in racial profiling, and attempted to falsify evidence. We recommend immediate termination of their employment and referral to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by an outbreak of voices. Such a decisive finding was virtually unprecedented in police disciplinary proceedings. Marcus remained seated, his expression unchanged as the implications of the decision rippled through the room. Officer Wilson leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is bullshit. My family built this department. You can't do this to me." His father grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back into his seat, but Wilson shook him off. "This is your fault," he shouted, pointing at Marcus. "You and your kind. Always playing the victim. Always claiming racism when you don't get your way." Security officers moved to restrain Wilson as Hargrove frantically tried to control his client. Marcus watched silently, letting Wilson's outburst speak for itself. As the room gradually emptied, Rodriguez approached Marcus. "Congratulations, Chief. This is a landmark decision." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's just the beginning, Lieutenant. The real fight is still ahead of us." Despite the hearing panel's recommendation for termination, Commissioner Reynolds announced his decision. The following day, Officers Wilson, Fowler, and Russo would receive 6-month suspensions with pay, followed by mandatory retraining. No criminal charges would be pursued. The decision sent shockwaves through both the department and the community. Marcus had anticipated this outcome, but was nonetheless disappointed by the blatant disregard for the panel's findings. He sat in his office, reviewing Reynolds' statement, which cited the officers' otherwise exemplary records and the high-stress nature of modern policing as mitigating factors. The commissioner had even suggested that Marcus share responsibility for the incident by failing to immediately identify himself in a clear manner, a claim directly contradicted by all available evidence. The public response was immediate and divided. Community activists called the decision a whitewash, while police unions praised it as measured and fair. Social media erupted with heated debates, the incident becoming a Rorschach test for one's views on race and policing. Marcus had remained publicly silent about the decision, taking time to consider his next steps carefully. The personal toll of the past 2 weeks was beginning to weigh on him. His children were still staying with relatives, his home remained under police protection after multiple threats, and he found himself increasingly isolated within the department. Several command staff members who had initially supported him were now keeping their distance, concerned about their own careers. Deputy Chief Thomas Reed, once Marcus's closest ally in the department, knocked tentatively on his door late that afternoon. "Got a minute?" Chief Reed asked, closing the door behind him. His discomfort was evident as he took a seat across from Marcus. "I wanted to talk to you about the direction things are headed." Marcus set aside the report he'd been reviewing. "I'm listening." Reed shifted uneasily. "Some of the command staff are concerned that this situation is becoming a distraction from our core mission. There's talk that you're putting a personal vendetta ahead of department cohesion." "Is that what you think?" Tom Marcus asked quietly. Reed couldn't hold his gaze. "I think you have legitimate grievances. What happened to you was wrong. But taking on the commissioner, the unions, the entire system, it's not a fight you can win. And a lot of good people are getting caught in the crossfire. Including you. Reed nodded reluctantly. I've got 20 years in Marcus. 5 years from retirement. My daughter's starting college next year. The implication was clear. Reed couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of this fight. I understand, Marcus said, and he did. Everyone had their limits, their priorities. He couldn't expect others to risk what he was willing to risk. No hard feelings, Tom. After Reed left, Marcus sat alone in his darkening office. The isolation was strategic, he knew. Reynolds and his allies were working to cut him off from support to make his position untenable. His phone rang, displaying his son's number. Michael, he answered everything. Okay, no, Dad, it's not Michael, replied his voice tight with anger. I'm quitting the academy. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. What happened? Everything. Nothing. Just 1,000 little things every day. The whispers, the accidental exclusions from study groups, the instructors who suddenly find problems with everything I do. Today, Instructor Benson told me that maybe law enforcement isn't the right fit for my temperament after I aced the tactical exercise. Michael's voice cracked slightly. They're forcing me out because of you, because of what you're doing. Marcus felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Son, I'm sorry you're facing this. But running from it won't solve anything. Easy for you to say, Michael shot back. You're already chief. I'm just trying to get through the academy. Nothing about this is easy, Marcus replied quietly. But some fights are worth having, even when they cost us personally. There was a long silence before Michael spoke again. What if I'm not as strong as you, Dad? What if I don't want to be a symbol or a martyr? The question hit Marcus hard. He had raised his children to stand up for what was right. But had he prepared them for the consequences? This isn't about strength, Michael. It's about choices. And whatever choice you make, I'll support you. But make sure you're making it for the right reasons, not out of fear or frustration. After ending the call, Marcus drove home, the day's events weighing heavily on his mind. As he approached his house, he noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Captain Walter Jenkins, his first supervisor and longtime mentor, sat waiting for him. Jenkins, now in his 70s and retired for a decade, had been one of the first black captains in the department's history. They sat in Marcus's kitchen, 2 generations of black officers who had fought the same battles decades apart. I heard what's happening, Jenkins said, his weathered face creased with concern. Thought you could use some perspective from someone who's been there. Marcus poured them both coffee. I could use some advice, that's for sure. Reynolds is protecting these officers despite clear evidence of misconduct. The union's closing ranks. Half my command staff is avoiding me, and my kids are paying the price for my decisions. Jenkins nodded slowly. Sounds familiar. Back in '89, I testified against 3 officers who beat a black teenager half to death. Department turned on me overnight. My wife got threatening calls at home. My son was harassed at school. What did you do? Marcus asked. Kept fighting, Jenkins replied simply. Not because I thought I could change everything overnight, but because someone had to start somewhere. And here you are, 30 years later, still fighting the same fight. Progress isn't a straight line, son. It's circles within circles, sometimes coming back to the same point, but with new perspective, new tools. I'm not sure I'm making any difference at all, Marcus admitted. Jenkins fixed him with a steady gaze. The difference isn't always visible right away. Sometimes it's in the minds you change, the policies that shift just a little, the next generation that sees what's possible. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone. It was Rodriguez. Chief, I've found something you need to see. It connects Commissioner Reynolds directly to the cover-ups. He's been protecting these officers because they've been doing his dirty work. Marcus felt a surge of energy. Bring everything to my house. Now. After Jenkins left, Marcus paced his living room waiting for Rodriguez. This could be the breakthrough they needed, evidence that would be impossible to ignore. But it would also escalate the conflict, dramatically taking aim at one of the most powerful figures in county law enforcement. As Rodriguez laid out the evidence on his dining room table, Marcus felt a growing certainty. Files showed Reynolds had personally intervened in at least 7 cases involving officers Wilson, Fowler, and Russo. In each case, the officers had made arrests or seized evidence under legally questionable circumstances, always targeting individuals connected to Reynolds's political opponents or business competitors. He's been using them as his personal enforcers, Rodriguez explained. That's why he can't let them face real consequences. They know too much. The evidence was compelling, but also dangerous. Going after Reynolds would make Marcus powerful enemies beyond law enforcement. As Rodriguez left promising to secure the evidence in multiple locations, Marcus weighed his options. Fighting for accountability from patrol officers was one thing. Taking on a politically connected commissioner was another level entirely. His contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A courier delivered a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside, Marcus found more documents, these connecting Reynolds to a network of corrupt officials and business leaders who had benefited from selective enforcement and strategic harassment of competitors. An unsigned note read simply, "Not everyone is against you. Use this wisely." The sender remained anonymous, but the message was clear: Marcus wasn't as isolated as his opponents wanted him to believe. That night, as Marcus reviewed all the evidence, he made his decision. This had moved beyond his personal experience to a systemic issue that affected thousands of citizens. Whatever the personal cost, he had a responsibility to act. The next morning, Marcus received a text message requesting an urgent meeting with Commissioner Reynolds. The location was a rarely used conference room in the county administrative building. Marcus arrived precisely on time, finding Reynolds alone, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Marcus Reynolds began without preamble. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I want to find a way to resolve this situation that works for everyone." Marcus said nothing, waiting. Reynolds continued, "I've been thinking about your concerns. Perhaps the disciplinary measures were too lenient. I'm prepared to revisit them, perhaps terminate Officer Wilson as a show of good faith." When Marcus remained silent, Reynolds grew visibly nervous. "I'm also prepared to discuss your future. The State Director of Public Safety is retiring next year. With my recommendation, that position could be yours. A significant promotion, more influence, better compensation." The bribe was as transparent as it was substantial. In exchange for what exactly, Marcus finally asked. "In exchange for putting this unfortunate incident behind us," Reynolds replied smoothly. "No further investigations, no media campaigns, no external inquiries. We handle it internally, make the necessary adjustments, and move forward as allies rather than adversaries." Marcus studied the commissioner thoughtfully. "And if I decline?" Reynolds' genial expression hardened. "Then, I can't be responsible for the consequences. Careers are destroyed by friendly fire every day, Marcus. Allies become scarce. Mistakes are discovered in old cases. Families suffer needlessly." The threat was as clear as the bribe had been. "I see," Marcus said, rising from his chair. "I think we understand each other perfectly now, Commissioner." As Marcus walked to the door, Reynolds called after him. "Think about it, Marcus. This isn't just about you anymore." Marcus turned back briefly. "On that, Commissioner, we completely agree." That afternoon, Marcus called a meeting with Mayor Williams and 2 agents from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The evidence spoke for itself, and by evening, an official investigation had been launched. The personal cost would be high. Marcus knew, but the cost of silence would be immeasurably higher. 6 months after the traffic stop that changed everything, Marcus Washington stood at a podium outside the Riverview County Police Department. Behind him, newly installed FBI Director Eliza Chen and Mayor James Williams flanked a group of community leaders and police reform advocates. Before him, a sea of reporters and cameras captured the historic moment. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in policing for Riverview County, and beyond, Marcus began his deep voice carrying across the assembled crowd. The FBI's investigation has revealed patterns of misconduct that extended far beyond a single traffic stop or a few rogue officers. It exposed a system designed to protect those who abused their authority while silencing those who spoke against them. The FBI investigation, triggered by the evidence Marcus had provided, had resulted in the indictment of Commissioner Reynolds and 11 other officials on charges ranging from corruption and evidence tampering to civil rights violations. Reynolds had resigned in disgrace, along with several high-ranking officers implicated in the scandal. The investigation had expanded to include financial crimes, revealing a network of kickbacks and illegal arrangements that had persisted for years. The path to this moment has not been easy, Marcus continued. Many have paid a personal price for standing up against injustice. But today, we take a significant step toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. The reforms Marcus had implemented in Oakland were now being extended county-wide independent civilian oversight boards with real authority, transparent complaint procedures, comprehensive data collection on all police interactions, psychological screening for bias, and a complete overhaul of training procedures. Most significantly, the culture of silence that had protected abusive officers was being systematically dismantled. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, a familiar figure approached Marcus cautiously. Officer Bradley Wilson, no longer in uniform, had lost everything: his job, his reputation, and nearly his freedom. Only his cooperation with investigators had kept him from joining Reynolds behind bars. Chief Washington Wilson began his former arrogance, replaced by genuine humility. "I know you have no reason to speak with me, but I wanted to apologize face to face. What I did to you, what I've done to others. There's no excuse." Marcus studied the man before him. "You're right, there is no excuse. But there is always the possibility of redemption, Officer Wilson. Not through words, but through actions." Wilson nodded, understanding the implicit challenge. "I'm trying. I'm working with a community outreach program now, speaking to academy classes about what happened, how easy it is to become the very thing you're supposed to protect against." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged. "A long road ahead, but a start." Later that week, Marcus stood before a different audience. His children finally returned home after months away. Alicia had transferred to a local college to be closer to home, while Michael had made the difficult decision to continue at the academy despite the challenges. "I'm proud of you both," Marcus told them over dinner in their home, now free of police protection for the first time in months. "You've shown extraordinary courage through all of this." "We learned from the best," Alicia replied, reaching for her father's hand. "When they were trying to intimidate you, threatening your career, your safety, you never backed down." Michael nodded in agreement. "That's why I decided to stay at the academy. If people like us walk away, nothing ever changes. Someone has to be willing to stay and fight from within." The conversation was interrupted by a text message from Mayor Williams, confirming that the City Council had unanimously approved Marcus's appointment as the new police commissioner for the entire county, replacing Reynolds. It was a position that would allow him to implement reforms countywide to reshape law enforcement culture from the top down. 1 year to the day after the traffic stop, Commissioner Marcus Washington presided over the graduation of a new class of police officers, the most diverse in the county's history. Among them was Michael Washington, standing tall in his new uniform, and beside him a face that gave Marcus pause. Officer Wilson's son, who had chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, but with a very different understanding of what the badge represented. As the new officers took their oath, Marcus addressed them with words that reflected the journey of the past year. "The badge you receive today is not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of responsibility. It does not elevate you above the communities you serve, but connects you to them. Your authority comes not from the power to enforce, but from the trust of those you protect. Never forget that true justice cannot exist without equality, respect, and humility." As the ceremony concluded, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of injustice confronted with courage and persistence had catalyzed transformation. The work was far from complete, the road ahead still challenging, but the foundations for lasting change had been laid. The cycle of accountability had begun to replace the cycle of protection and privilege that had allowed abuses to flourish. And in that shift lay hope for a future where the law truly served all citizens equally, regardless of race or position. "The greatest power we have," Marcus told the assembled officers in his closing words, "is not the authority to control others, but the courage to control ourselves. Remember that every interaction, every decision, every moment of your service shapes not just your legacy, but the very nature of justice in our society. Choose wisely, for the consequences echo far beyond the moment." What would you do if you witnessed an incident of racial profiling or police misconduct? Would you have the courage to speak up like Marcus Washington did? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating a more just and equitable system. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who need to hear this message. Together we can make a difference. One conversation, one action, one stand for justice at a time. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. And remember, change begins when someone is brave enough to demand it. Chief Marcus Washington's story illustrates powerful truths about justice, courage, and systemic change. First, it reveals how racial bias affects everyone regardless of status or position. Even a police chief experienced the same discrimination that countless ordinary citizens face daily, showing that racial profiling is truly systemic rather than isolated incidents. Second, it demonstrates that accountability requires both individual courage and institutional support. Washington's determination alone wasn't enough. It took allies within the system, community pressure, and external investigation to create meaningful change. Third, it highlights the personal cost of standing against injustice. Washington risked his career, reputation, and family safety to pursue accountability. Such sacrifice is often necessary for transformation. Fourth, the story shows how corruption protects itself through intimidation, isolation, and misdirection. When power is threatened, it fights back using every available resource. Finally, it teaches us that change is possible but never easy. Real transformation requires confronting uncomfortable truths, dismantling entrenched systems, and rebuilding with justice at the foundation. Washington's journey reminds us that the path to equity demands persistence in the face of resistance, courage in moments of fear, and an unwavering commitment to justice, even when personal cost is high. True leadership means standing firm when it would be easier to compromise. What would you do if you witnessed racial injustice happening right in front of you? Would you have the courage to speak up like Chief Washington, even knowing the potential consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever experienced or witnessed racial profiling, comment justice to stand in solidarity with those fighting for change. Have you seen examples of good police officers working to reform the system from within? Tell us about those heroes too. This story shows that one person's courage can spark meaningful change, but real transformation requires all of us. Like this video if you believe in the importance of police accountability, and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of individuals fighting against discrimination and injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racial profiling in America. Together, we can build awareness and push for the changes our communities desperately need. Thank you for listening to Chief Washington's powerful journey. May his courage inspire us all to stand firm against injustice wherever we find it.